Really what I want to do is give you a little intro to FenestraPro version 7, generally, some of the features, and talk about how it leverages Revit a little more, and particularly the energy analysis model that Ian's been speaking about, and how we can kind of enhance some of those workflows and provide an on-ramp into Revit and the energy analytical model. Dave gave you a bit of an overview to FenestraPro, to ourselves, to what we've been up to in the last few years, and I think it's great. Like, for me personally, it's really satisfying, I suppose, to see firms like Skidmore, Owens and Merrill and Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill and AECOM, etc., using our tools to deliver and to design and deliver these beautiful, high-performing buildings around the world. But when you think about those two things, like aesthetically beautiful and high-performing, there's almost a conflict there. It's very difficult to, there's two different things at play there. So how do we figure out what the right options are, or what the right solutions are? But I suppose designing is all about solving problems, right? Like, where you have some limitations, and those limitations might be budget or site constraints, or in this case, the environmental performance and the energy performance of a building. And we've seen these designers, solve some of these problems relating to their skins, relating to their envelopes in a really innovative and really nice way with FenestraPro, and how they respond to their particular climates, be it in Kuwait, like AECOM did, or India, Smith & Gill, and Skidmore, Owens and Merrill in North America. Talking about the facade and the skin, I suppose, or the envelope, call it what you want. It's really interesting. We often, myself and Dave, often use this term like it's it's the moderator between the internal and the external, and it's the public face of the building, and all these kind of things. But if we take a typical building, like a very notional building, obviously lots of stuff is at play here. The use of that building, the typology of the building, the location, the orientation, all of these things. But if we take the typical office building, we know about 12% of energy use is accounting for the heat loss. And that makes sense with like opaque walls, and particularly windows and glazing is going to lose quite a lot of heat. And then obviously your roofs and floors. The artificial lighting accounts for about 19%. Or looking at it a different way is the lack of natural daylighting, right? So using electricity to power our lights and whatever. And then quite a lot of it is accounting for heating and cooling, solar heat gains, casual gains within those spaces, all of that kind of stuff. So when we look at all of those kind of things and all of those considerations that are very driven, very influenced by the facade, well over half of the energy use of this typical building is influenced by the facade. Ian and Oliver both talked a lot about embodied carbon, and again, when we break down the building, more than a quarter of that typical building is the embodied carbon is relating to the facade and all its different components. So it's important, right? And I think we all agree that, I think architecturally, we all know the importance of our facades and of our envelopes. FenestraPro is all about, I suppose, passive considerations, and not trying to push passive considerations out, like we want you to design passive house standard buildings or anything like that. But it's about the practices, or those best practices, I suppose. And when we take some of the things that FenestraPro accounts for, thermal performance, daylighting, and solar heat gains, and remember back to the last slide, those kind of big things that the envelope is really affecting in our building. Those three things are very much pulling against each other. The less glazing I have, the better my thermal performance, because I've less glass, but the poorer my daylighting, in simple terms. So I go the other way and I go loads of glazing. Now I've got much better daylighting, but I've got very high heat gains and, casual gains or heat gains within those spaces that I have to cool. So therefore I'm using a lot of energy to cool, So it's a difficult one to get right. How do we optimize, and how do we find that sweet spot, or that middle ground? And we do that through the geometry and the materiality of the building. I mean, I just talked about the thermal performance and the, increasing the amount of glazing and things like that. That's very much what FenestraPro is about. It's about finding that sweet spot using those kind of geometry and materiality considerations. So FenestraPro is a Revit application, as you know. It's a web platform that supports that application, and it demonstrates the impacts that your design decisions have on the energy efficiency of your building. So it'll do that by leveraging Revit, and we've heard a lot about Revit and the analytical model and stuff like that, but it leverages that by looking at the geometry and the materiality, and not just looking at them, but driving them as well. So it's a two-way thing. It's reading from the model and pushing back to the model, and very much looking at that energy analysis or analytical model that Ian was talking about. It's not easy. Again, as he said, Revit is a beast, and not only a beast for the user, but a beast for a developer like us, to get into and to really understand and to really try and leverage that information for a number of different reasons. But we've made huge strides in the last year or so, culminating in FenestraPro version 7, on how we can better leverage that workflow and that kind of interaction with Revit. So I'm going to give you a taster on FenestraPro version 7, and then we'll talk about a couple of the features as we go through it. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those things that you've seen in that video and a couple of the features and functionality of FenestraPro version 7. Just to talk about that energy analysis model, and that's very much what we leverage with FenestraPro. Ian talked about some of the reasons we do that. We very much look for the spaces and the surfaces within the Revit model, because the Revit energy analysis model will compile that and put that together and make sense of it, I suppose, so that all the different spaces and rooms within that building are, there's a logical sense to them, and all of the external surfaces have a logical sense to them. FenestraPro will put those things together and start building them up into facades, and then we can start getting sort of real-time feedback and metrics from those facades. It's all about keeping the data in the model as well. I suppose, we were talking a little bit earlier about a Rhino model and having some grasshopper stuff, and Ladybug and Diva and all, but then moving into Revit later as a documentation tool. But you have a lot going on there. You're building a couple of different models. You're, trying to replicate and rebuild, and it's a kind of a not that efficient workflow. There's obvious benefits to different tools, and I'm all about different tools. But the idea here is that it's very much, the data starts and ends, in one stream. There is challenges though around that energy analysis model. So it very much depends on your model, the way you've built your model, the quality of data in it, is all the information there? Are the properties of all the different materials around your facades there? Is there modeling issues? Or, do you have big gaps in your facade, or is your roof slab actually a floor slab in Revit? All of those kind of things can build up to cause problems for tools like FenestraPro. The Revit API, additionally, can be quite slow depending on the size of the model and the things you're trying to do. And we've been trying to tackle that for a few years. How best to do that, and we've come up with some new workflows as part of version 7. And lastly, it's quite difficult to identify those problems. There might be warnings or issues there within the Revit model, but you're not really too sure what they relate to. So we've provided in our new application, very much a model checker or an auditor, or let's call it an on-ramp to the Revit model. So when you open FenestraPro first, it's going to identify the issues in that energy analysis model that you might have. The biggest thing, or one of the biggest things from FenestraPro's point of view, is the glazing property. So we're not going to be able to tell you what your heat gains or what the thermal performance is for the envelope if there's no U value or no solar heat gain coefficient. So FenestraPro will prompt you to provide that. You can start viewing your energy model as well, start looking at the spaces, start looking at external walls versus internal walls, and just kind of visually check it and sanity check it as such as you're walking through it. And this kind of on-ramp or onboarding process takes you through step by step and shows you the warnings. And then even you can highlight a warning and it will show you where it's happening in your Revit model, so you can easily go and fix it if it can't be done automatically. Code compliance is something that is obviously, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, it's a bit of a beast and it's a bit of a tricky one, and there's all sorts of different things going on, different regions, different territories. But again, from a very high level and from a very early stage, what we wanted to do is just give designers an understanding of, my walls should be this, my glazing should be that, my roof, should be this U value, And FenestraPro can identify through Revit the location of your building based on the location of the project, and then prompt you with some suggested, prescriptive or elemental performances or window to wall ratios. So in, Dublin, it might be part L and your U value for a roof is X and your U value for a wall is Y, and it will tell you, and you can accept them and apply it and then see, does your envelope comply with that? You can also start adding those values notionally to some of the wall systems or roof systems that haven't got that information. So again, you're just starting to add some information to the model that you can start making some kind of realistic and justified decisions. We've always been about generating glazing from a very early stage. FenestraPro, in the very early conceptual massing tools in Revit, we were applying 40% glass to wall ratio, and we smack it on the model, and you can start seeing the impacts of that with relating to your building performance. But we're doing it in a more sophisticated way now, and using our viewer, and even with the detailed model, you can start applying window openings or curtain wall openings from a geometric point of view. So I'm saying I want 30% glazing, but I have a known punch window of 1 meter by 2 meters, and FenestraPro will preview it, and you can play around with it and then apply it, and it will or it will add it to the model and effectively draw it onto your facade. Or you could drive it based on the performance that you're trying to achieve. So I want to max out, or I want a limit of my heat gain of 20 watts per square meter, and FenestraPro will go, well, that's this area. And I can say, well, I wanted one long opening or 5 different squares or whatever. And again, it will keep previewing until you're happy and then apply it to the model. But then also that's generating the geometry, but we also want to generate the materiality. So again, from a database of quite a lot of product, manufacturers' products and IGUs that are off the shelf, we can start searching for the appropriate glazing solution. So Guardian Glass, Vitro Glass, Viracon in the United States, Pilkingtons. You can start dialing in performances that you're trying to achieve. I want a U value of X and a solar heat gain coefficient of Y, and FenestraPro will tell you these are the IGUs that that are available in this region, or you can filter and search and compare and lots of different stuff. We apply it to our Revit model. That doesn't bring it in as a BIM object, as geometry. It applies that analytic construction values to your model. So then you'll see the impact on daylighting or on heat gains or the thermal performance. And then additionally, you can go to a configurator and I want a triple glaze unit with this gas fill and this coating and whatever else you want to build, and bring it into FenestraPro, bring it into Revit via FenestraPro and apply it to your building. Shading solutions, again, just being able to justify it or sanity check things. Often sunshades or, devices are the first things to go in value engineering, let's just say. So can we afford to lose the shading? Can we up the performance of the glazing to account for that? All of those kind of things can be done through FenestraPro, through your viewer and linking back to the Revit model. You can visualize that shading, what it looks like, across the year, but you can also quantify it. So for each facade and each surface, you're saying this is going to be shaded 40% of daylight hours, or whatever that is, and look for the peaks and the averages, all of that kind of information. And then I'm sure our team at FenestraPro is sick of listening to me say it, but I'm a big believer in this idea of what's measurable is manageable, and when you can see the data, you can see the values and the metrics, you can make justified decisions. So we're all about the metrics. So in FenestraPro, from your Revit model, it's effectively pulling all this information and dropping it onto our platform. So you can go in and see all of the quantities, all of the properties, all of the performances, all of the materials that you're using, whatever. But you can also customize all of that information in the way that you want to show it, right? So you can tell your own story, you create your own narrative around the design, and then share that information. So that can be shared across your own design team, to your clients, whatever that looks like, I don't know if I went really fast there, but it feels like it was quick. I'm just kind of finish off just talking about a couple of things that we're doing in 2023. Ian talked a little bit about what's happening on the Autodesk side, particularly with total carbon and taking operational carbon and embodied carbon and looking at it through that sort of lens of this is your whole building. And where Autodesk goes, I'm not going to say where Autodesk goes, we follow, I suppose, where Autodesk goes, we validate with our own users and our own customers and see how can we leverage that information as an Autodesk industry partner. How can we leverage what they have done into our own tool and present it or manipulate it in a different way? So we're starting to look at this idea of total carbon as well. So we're starting to put in this idea of embodied and systems analysis, using the systems analysis piece in Revit. We can, start, I suppose, execute that systems analysis event and then pull that information. So that's creating from Energy Plus, I think, if I remember correctly, all of that kind of that whole building energy use. We can then extrapolate or skim or scrape that information to just the stuff that your envelope relates to or your envelope is driving. So we can show the energy use and therefore the emissions relating to your envelope. And then likewise, the embodied carbon. So we can do something really simple around floor area and the type of building that it is, but we can also start looking at the components of your facade, because we've done this with Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, where we break a facade into a million things, being glass and frame and mullion and spandrel and shadow box and all of those kind of things. And when we have all that information, we can start driving the embodied carbon. So then what you're getting is, going back to where I started, you're getting this understanding around the impact of the facade. You have a better look at the operational carbon or the operational energy of your building and what's relating to the facade. So you can make some really good decisions around that. You have an understanding of the embodied carbon of the building and that's related to your facade, and make some really good decisions around that. And then the trade-off between the two, right? So what does that look like over 25 years? Oliver talked a little bit about it and how important it is, but as we get nearer, let's say, to zero energy buildings, your embodied carbon is going to get more and more prevalent and more impactful. So we need to understand that and be able to start seeing that as part of our design process. So, was that 15 minutes? Must have been. Thanks for that. Appreciate your time, and thank you.